Because Johanna was a minor and named as a person of no contact on the restraining order, I could not get any help from child services. Furthermore, if I got child services involved, they assured me it would be a longer time to get Jojo back. My life quickly descended into a whirlpool of litigation. I filed writs of habeas corpus, but because Brunswick County was not accustomed to using the habeas corpus for minors, no judge signed it for me. I felt so powerless and helpless. I went to the Brunswick County Sheriff's Office and I just bawled my eyes out because someone had to explain to me what was going on. The restraining order my mother had taken out on me had not one single incident of any physical, verbal, or otherwise contact for abuse. The sheriffs themselves were surprised that any judge could have signed such a document because there were no allegations of abuse. The sheriffs listened and gave me guidance, but they themselves couldn't help me. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice Program, Johanna had fallen into the higher percentile to be abducted by a family member. Clearly, what I was experiencing was something that happened in America every day. And this was also not the first time this had happened in my own family. But I was determined that this would be the very last time. I was alone, afraid, confused, and in utter and complete despair. So I called someone who I knew could think clearly to help me out of this really dark situation. I called Richard Brookshire, one of my classmates at New York Film Academy, and he contacted the school to let them know exactly what was going on with me. And from them, I was able to secure a lawyer. It had cost me hundreds of dollars in taxi fare to drive from my hotel room in Chalut all the way to Bolivia, North Carolina, to go to court every day to file these papers. Lucky for me, my taxi driver was a beautiful soul by the name of Candy, who knew every single person in Brunswick County, and it's through her that I found one of the best attorneys I could possibly find. After reviewing the evidence, my attorney assured me that we would have success. But at that time, I didn't know what to believe. My faith in humanity and the justice system was completely broken. If my own mother could do something like this to me, what would a judge do to me? I still had to wait for the date to go to court. In the meantime, Johanna had to spend all that time with someone I knew was dangerous. But why would my mother even do such a thing? My mother is a devout Jehovah's Witness, and I am her only child who was born and raised completely in the faith. Through her own indiscretions and indecency, she had to leave the family. I was raised by my father, and I never had to convert to any religion. Therefore, I was never baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. Because I was not a Jehovah's Witness, my mother's religion practiced shunning non-Jehovah's Witness family members. Jehovah's Witness shunning includes to make homeless, to deny financial and emotional support, to ostracize from the family and the community by any means necessary. Practice has been so disgusting and insidious, it has been reviewed in many legal cases as a practice that is detriment to the entire family unit, therefore destructive to society in general. My mother has been caught up in a cult for over 40 years. When any religion seeks to isolate anyone from their own flesh and blood, you're talking about cult territory.
Do not think I came to put peace upon the earth. I came to put not peace, but a sword. For I came to cause division with a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a young wife against her mother-in-law. What does Jehovah expect out of us? Even if the situation is so painful that we have a family member who's disfellowship, what does he want? Loyalty. That's what Jehovah wants.
According to this Jehovah's Witness elder, Jehovah wanted blind, unquestioning, unfeeling, unthinking loyalty. By separating and isolating Jehovah's Witnesses from their family members, the Jehovah's Witnesses have gained billions of dollars in donation from their faithful congregation who leaves everything to them in their will. According to a Pew Research study on religion for adults 65 and older, many cannot interpret the scriptures and many don't know the difference between right and wrong. In that case, cults like the Jehovah's Witness, which practice shunning family members, should be banned to protect vulnerable senior citizens and their assets. By kidnapping Johanna, my mother had expected to raise her as a Jehovah's Witness. She knew of my plans to raise Jojo in Africa, and this was her chance. Even though my mother treated me poorly, I loved my mother dearly. Whenever she called, I would come running, but like the fool, she would always put me through the paces, and I would end up in a very disturbing position. I genuinely thought that with all the events of 2020 and COVID-19, that my mother could at least let us work together, live together, and overcome whatever struggles we were having. I thought this was a time for unity, not division. Obviously, I clearly misjudged the situation. As with all cults, my mother's religion creates an us versus them mentality. The us versus them cult feature is extremely dangerous in that it breeds a consistent mental superiority to others, which is consistent with malignant narcissistic personality disorder. Malignant narcissists consistently use this kind of mentality. I am going to heaven, you are not. I am superior to you because my religion is for the chosen people. And as God's chosen people, we shouldn't associate with other people who are not. Thus, extremist religions and cults like the Jehovah's Witnesses are a hotbed for malignant narcissists. Another key cult feature practiced by the Jehovah's Witnesses is apocalyptic thinking.
Years just before 1914, anticipation was high. Since 1876, Charles Taze Russell had published that the Gentile times would end in October 1914. But 1914 brought unexpected trials that would test the Bible students' faith as never before. The year 1914 came, and it went.
That's right. The Jehovah's Witnesses had predicted the end of the world not once, not twice, but at least 6 different times. As a religion, the Jehovah's Witnesses appeared more like false prophets than any witnesses to Jehovah. Over the years, I have seen my mother lose jobs, opportunities, many things behind donating her time to the Jehovah's Witness cult. The Jehovah's Witness cult also had a very long history of child abuse, child sexual abuse, and many other issues concerning children. There is no way anyone could possibly feel safe about their children being around this kind of cult, especially that in the past, when I asked my mother to babysit, Johanna would have mysterious bruises and busted lips. My mother was never kind or loving towards me. She never gave me any kind of praise or recognized my accomplishments. Though I was a consistent overachiever, nothing was ever good enough. My mother always treated me as a competitor and a rival, and not one of her children to love, nurture, and protect. And in that household, it was always about competing for Johanna's affection, while simultaneously excluding me as Johanna's mother and parent, as if I didn't deserve any respect or recognition as her mother. She had specific roles for her children. There were some who were the golden child, who could do no wrong. There was the scapegoat, who everything was blamed upon. Anything that could possibly go wrong would be their fault. In this family, that would be me. Then there are the flying monkeys, those who would be recruited to also abuse the scapegoat. Together with the abuser, the flying monkeys and the golden child would consistently gaslight, abuse, and call to feel inferior those who they victimized. Lying was also a consistent tool in my mother's manipulation toolbox. In the end, the victim would feel empty, like a void, as if they were nothing. They never felt seen, loved, or accepted. This kind of pernicious abuse and neglect can lead to feelings of complete and utter despair. And that's exactly how I felt, cooped up in my hotel room, completely unsure of what would happen next. Of the first two charges that my mother brought against me, I knew that the criminal trespassing charges were the most important. When I studied real estate law, I understood that trespassing was imposed in certain southern states specifically to imprison and lock up black people who foraged for food and lived off the land after slavery. These charges included high penalties or jail time. Though I knew I had the truth, I was still very nervous because wrongful convictions are a serious issue in America, especially when it comes to black people. The Brunswick County prosecutor was ready to eat me alive. However, her witness didn't appear. Evidently, my element of surprise had worked. My mother, believing that I went back to New York, did not see the need to go to court. We waited for her for 3 hours. When she finally did appear, my attorney assured the prosecutor that he would be seeking perjury charges against my mother because indeed I had factual data that she had falsified her statements. Through emails that I kept, text messages, and my airplane receipt contradicted exactly what she had written. The prosecutor had no choice but to drop the charges. Though my mother had just lost this battle, she genuinely believed that she could win the war. She was waiting for me in the parking lot, calling me, honking her horn, trying to get my attention for me to go over there and violate the restraining order. I pretended as though I could neither see her nor hear her, and kept walking until I got to safety. The court time to answer the restraining order charges was only 3 hours away. I hid in the municipal cafeteria until it was time to go to court again. And again, my mother this time drove up next to me, had Johanna scream my name, call me, and beg for me to come and talk to her. And again, I had to keep walking as if I could not hear. Once we got into the courthouse, my mother once again tried to make me violate the restraining order. She came and sat immediately in front of me, knowing Jojo would want to play with me and get next to me. Once again, I had to ignore my own child as if she wasn't there. When the court proceedings began, my mother had no choice but to represent herself in court because she had believed that I had gone back to New York. This was a fight she was not expecting. My attorney first got my mother to contradict herself on the stand. When he caught her in 3 consistent lies, he presented her with the facts. Mainly, the evidence came down to all of my receipts that I kept that I was supporting the household and my bank statements proving that I was providing financial services to my mother. Her email requesting me to move out for religious reasons, and the now vacated trespassing charges with contradictory information. Other critical pieces of evidence was that my mother had no complaint about any physical or verbal abuse. And finally, the most critical piece of evidence was that I should have never been served the restraining order because all my bags were packed, meaning I was fleeing from the abuser, my mother. Like a true narcissist, my mother had not thought out anything until the end. Clearly, she miscalculated the situation. After closing arguments, it didn't take long for the judge to deliver a verdict in my favor. The judge had found my mother to be deceptive, and she also stated that there was no reason to hold Johanna. She immediately returned Johanna to my care in custody. My mother stormed out of the courtroom while I sat there and wailed. This was the first time in my entire life of over 40 years that anyone was able to find the facts and the truth that my mother was a cruel and evil liar. My mother had forgotten that God was fighting my battles for me. I finally received my justice, but it wasn't lost on me the date in which I received such liberation. My mother had chosen the wrong date on the calendar to fight me. June the 19th is a very important date on the African American calendar.
Juneteenth, short for June 19th, is the day commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. It's a holiday that has been celebrated since 1866 and represents a critical turning point in American history. It's the longest tradition of celebrating the emancipation of thousands of enslaved people who forcibly worked and lived in inhumane conditions.
As a person who was facing inhumane conditions, including bondage and captivity, before going to court that day, I called on every ancestor in the land of North Carolina who had ever been enslaved or shackled to rise up for my help. I needed to leave Brunswick County on the next thing smoking, but there were no flights available, so I called Miss Candy instead to make ready the carriage so that Jojo and I could get as far away from North Carolina as possible. Miss Candy was so excited for my victory. In the 2-hour taxi ride from Charlotte to Wilson, she repeatedly assured me that everything would be okay and reminded me that I should never look back. On the 8-hour train ride from Wilson to Philadelphia, I had a lot to reflect over. Mainly, who could live in a country where Black people are hunted and murdered by the police? Who could live in a country where anyone can accuse any person of anything at any time and the police is called to arrest or evict? Who could live in a country where anyone can separate a child from their own mother using lies to influence the pen of a judge? Who could live in a country where cults are given free rein to destroy families in the name of freedom of religion? You may call it post-traumatic stress disorder, but I knew on that train that my time in America was over. I had nothing left in America. No family, nothing. I was on my way to Philadelphia to see my friend Zakia, Jojo's godmother, before exiting the country once and for all. It was very important to me to let Jojo know every step of the way where we were going and what we were doing. I remember when we arrived in Philadelphia, she said, "Mama, are we going to take the plane to Africa now?" And I burst into tears. It was the first time I realized that Jojo expected to go to Africa. How was I going to explain to Jojo that I didn't even know where in Africa to go? Who in Africa was I going to? Those are questions that had haunted me for a long time. But one night, while visiting Zakia in Philadelphia, I had a dream. The dream was very specific. It told me to seek the city of peace. Knowing I was supposed to be in Africa, I Googled which city was the city of peace in Africa.